Her world began with a single, terrified command from her mother: eradicate the poetry. Augusta Ada Byron was born into the fallout of a celebrity supernova. Her father was Lord Byron, the poet, the madman, the most famous, most scandalous man in Europe. A man who drank wine from a human skull and left a trail of broken hearts from London to Greece. He saw his newborn daughter once, kissed her forehead, and then vanished forever, a demon exiled from England. Her mother, Annabella Milbank, was his opposite, a mathematician, a woman of rigid logic and cold piety. The press called her the Princess of Parallelograms, and she lived in mortal terror of the Byron disease, the madness, the passion, the dark, untamable imagination she called poetry, that she believed festered in her daughter's blood like a dormant plague. So she built a cage for Ada's mind, a fortress of facts designed to starve the beast within. While other aristocratic girls learned needlepoint, Ada was drilled in logarithmic tables until her nose bled. While they read novels, she was forced to lie motionless on a wooden board for hours at a time, a cruel practice designed to teach her absolute self-control. Her tutors were a rotating cast of the country's finest scientific minds, their mission not to inspire, but to cauterize, to burn out the father's wild imagination with the cold fire of mathematical proof. But they didn't understand. You can't kill an idea, you only force it to go deeper. Locked in her room at age 12, recovering from a paralyzing bout of measles, Ada's mind didn't shrink, it escaped. She couldn't doodle flowers, so she designed a flying machine. This wasn't a childish fantasy, it was a methodical obsession. She studied the anatomy of bird wings. She investigated materials. What was the tensile strength of paper versus silk? She filled notebooks with complex calculations, working out power-to-weight ratios for a steam-powered flight. She called her grand secret theory flyology. It was her first act of rebellion, an act of pure Byronic poetry disguised in the language of science. She was translating the soul of a bird into the grammar of engineering. Her mother saw the meticulous diagrams and praised the science, blind to the soaring dream that fueled them. She thought she was winning. She was wrong. At 17, Ada was unleashed upon London society. A pale, brilliant girl with her father's dark eyes blinking in the overwhelming glare of the ballroom gaslights. And it was there, at a glittering party filled with the drone of polite conversation, that she met her destiny. A furious, wild-haired man who smelled of machine oil and obsession. Charles Babbage. He wasn't a lord or a politician. He was a heretic. A mathematician so consumed with rage at human error that he was building a god of brass and iron to replace it. He led Ada through the crowd, not to the dance floor, but to his drawing room. And there it was, the difference engine. A 2-foot-tall prototype, a waterfall of gleaming silver and brass gears. Babbage cranked a handle. The machine whirred to life, with a sound like 1,000 tiny thoughts clicking into place. It solved polynomial functions with a rhythmic, alien precision. The crowd saw a curiosity, a clever toy. A lord standing by chuckled, "Exceedingly clever, Babbage, but utterly useless." Ada saw the future. She saw a new language taking shape in the intricate dance of the gears. This wasn't just a calculator, it was a mechanical mind. She peppered Babbage with questions so sharp, so insightful, They cut through his usual bluster. While others saw the machine's limits, what it did, she was the only one who saw its potential, what it could become. That night, she wrote in her journal, her pen scratching furiously. Babbage, she realized, had invented a new kind of loom, one that wove algebraic patterns. She understood, with a terrifying clarity that set her heart pounding, that she was the only one who could see the tapestries it would create. The cage her mother built was about to break, because Ada had just found the key. What happens when a mind forged to suppress imagination is introduced to the most imaginative machine ever conceived?
The world tried to put her back in her box. She was married off to an amiable aristocrat, William King, soon to be the Earl of Lovelace. She became the Countess of Lovelace. She had 3 children. She played the part of the perfect Victorian wife. It was a slow, suffocating death of the mind. Her body, always frail, began to betray her. A litany of illnesses left her in chronic pain, managed by a dangerous cocktail of laudanum and opium. The world swam in a narcotic haze. But through the fog, the engine called to her. Babbage's difference engine had failed. The government pulled the funding. Babbage was a broken man, a prophet scorned. But he had a new idea, a far more dangerous one. He called it the Analytical Engine. This wasn't a calculator anymore. This was a general-purpose computer. It had a mill, the CPU, and a store, the memory. It could be programmed with punched cards, like a Jacquard loom. It was the blueprint for every computer that would ever exist. And no one on Earth understood its true implications, except for the young Countess Babbage now called his enchantress of numbers. Ada became his intellectual partner in heresy. Their correspondence was a torrent of fire, filled with dizzying debates on the nature of computation. He provided the mechanics, she provided the meaning, the poetry. The Analytical Engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything, she argued in one letter, the ink stained with laudanum drops. It was the first clear statement on the limits of artificial intelligence 100 years before Alan Turing was even born. But the engine was a ghost. It existed only in thousands of pages of Babbage's chaotic blueprints. To build it would require a fortune. And that's when the Byron disease, the madness her mother had tried so hard to suppress, finally found its moment. Ada made a desperate, catastrophic decision. She would fund the future herself, through gambling. It started as a system, a cold, mathematical plan. She wasn't a common gambler, she told herself. She was a mathematician applying probability theory to horse racing. She developed a complex algorithm, formed a secret syndicate, and began a thrilling, secret life. The quiet, sickly countess by day, a high-stakes risk-taker by night. The clatter of hooves on the racetrack was to her the sound of the Analytical Engine's gears turning. And for a while it worked. She won. The money was flowing. The dream of funding the engine felt real. Then came the twist, the one variable her equations could never account for. The flawed, greedy, treacherous human heart. Her syndicate partners betrayed her. They used her system, ran up massive debts in her name, and vanished. The house of cards collapsed. Suddenly, she wasn't a visionary funding the future. She was a debtor, a woman facing ruin and public scandal. Bailiffs whispered at her door. She was forced to pawn the Lovelace family diamonds twice. Her husband was horrified. Her mother was apoplectic, seeing not a failed mathematician, but the triumphant ghost of Lord Byron. One damp evening, as the gaslight sputtered outside, Ada stood before her husband, the unpaid betting slips a crumpled testament to her failure. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than any illness. She wasn't an enchantress. She was a fraud. She had stood over the corpse of her grand ambition and realized that the future tasted like ash.
Defeat is a quiet room. For Ada, it was her study, the curtains drawn, the laudanum bottle close at hand. She was 27 years old, trapped by debt, disease, and disgrace. Her great intellectual partnership with Babbage was strained. The world saw her as a failed socialite. The box was closing around her again. Then a letter arrived, a lifeline disguised as an insult. An Italian engineer, Luigi Menabrea, had written a paper describing the Analytical Engine. A friend of Babbage's suggested that Lady Lovelace, with her mathematical mind and fluency in French, might translate it for a British scientific journal. Translate it? A secretary's job. A task for a clever woman, not a visionary. It was a public demotion. Ada's pride recoiled, but Babbage saw an opportunity. "I want you," he urged her, "to add some notes of your own." The dam broke. For 9 months, Ada locked herself away. This was not a translation. This was a hijacking. She worked with a feverish intensity that burned away her sickness and shame. Her study became a chaotic sanctuary, the air thick with the scent of old paper and the sweet, cloying smell of laudanum. She scribbled calculations in the margins, her handwriting growing wilder. The translation itself was 20 pages. Her notes, appended at the end, were almost 3 times as long. This was her ruthless gambit. She wasn't just going to explain the engine, she was going to define it. She poured all of it in. The dreams of the flying machine, the logic of the gambling tables, the ghost of her father's poetry. She methodically, brilliantly laid out the core principles of modern computing. She explained the concept of a loop, a subroutine. She saw that the machine's power wasn't in numbers, but in symbols. The engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent, she wrote, her mind soaring. It could manipulate not just numbers, but any concept the human mind could reduce to a logical rule. Letters, musical notes, images. She was describing software, the idea that the hardware was just a vessel, and the instructions, the program,
were where the magic lived. And then, in the final explosive section, Note G, she did it. To prove the engine's capability, she wrote out, step by step, the world's first complex computer program. A detailed, flawless algorithm for calculating a sequence of numbers known as the Bernoulli numbers. It was a masterpiece of abstract reasoning. There was just one shocking, mind-bending fact. The machine she was writing it for did not exist. It was a ghost program for a ghost machine, an incantation for a god that had not yet been born. This was an act of pure, unadulterated intellectual faith. It was the ultimate bet, not on a horse, but on the future of human thought. She sent the manuscript to Babbage. He was stunned. He had designed a body of brass and iron. She had summoned its spirit from the void. They called her an interpreter, a translator, the enchantress of numbers. They never understood. She hadn't interpreted anything. She had become the monster her mother always feared. A creator.
The paper was published. Sketch of the Analytical Engine with notes by the translator. Signed only with the initials AAL. And the world said nothing. A few mathematicians read it. They nodded politely. They called it interesting. But nobody understood. Nobody saw the revolution she had laid bare on the page. The silence was more brutal than any criticism. The seed of the digital age had been planted, and the ground was simply not fertile. The great work of her life landed with a muffled thud. And the consequences were swift, and they were intimate. The engine was never built. Babbage died an angry, forgotten old man. For Ada, the descent was faster. The gambling debts returned. Her husband grew distant. Her own mother, Annabella, used the scandal to finally seize control. She moved into Ada's home, ostensibly as a nurse for her failing daughter, but in reality as a warden. The cage was rebuilt, stronger this time. In her final years, cancer consumed her body. The laudanum haze thickened. Her visitors were monitored. Her letters were read. Annabella was there, always there, a black-clad specter at her bedside, trying to force a last-minute religious confession, a final repudiation of the Byron blood, a final victory in her lifelong war against the poetry. But Ada had one last rebellion in her. As she lay dying, pale and skeletal at just 36 years old, the same age as the father she never knew, she made a final, shocking request. One that horrified her mother to the core. She asked to be buried next to Lord Byron. She wanted to be laid at rest in the family vault in Nottinghamshire, beside the scandalous poet whose ghost had haunted her, whose passion had fueled her, and whose legacy she had, in her own strange, mathematical way, fulfilled. It was her final, perfect line of code, an instruction to history, an admission that the logic and the poetry were never separate things. They were two sides of the same brilliant, tragic coin. She died. Her notes were filed away, and she was forgotten.
For 100 years, she was a footnote in Charles Babbage's story, the assistant, the interpreter. But ghosts don't stay buried. In the 1940s, as Alan Turing and his contemporaries were building the world's first real computers to break Nazi codes, they stumbled upon her paper. They blew the dust off the century-old journal and read her notes, and they were stunned. There, in the flowery prose of a Victorian countess, were the foundational principles of their new world. The loops, the subroutines, the vision of a universal machine. She had been there first. History remembers the hardware, the behemoth machines of iron and vacuum tubes, but Ada Lovelace knew the secret. She knew the machine is nothing without the instructions. The body is nothing without the soul. She remembered the feeling of ink on her fingers, the acrid smell of laudanum, and the impossible dream of a machine that could weave music from logic. She didn't just write a program, she wrote the source code for the future.